Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Child Anxiety FAQ podcast. FAQ stands for Frequently Asked Questions, and I'll be answering your questions about child and teen anxiety. My name is Dawn Friedman, and I've been working with kids and families for more than 30 years. Now I run Child Anxiety Support, a membership program for parents of anxious kids and teens. Let's get started. This week's question is, how do I motivate my anxious child to deal with their anxiety? This is a more complicated question than it first seems because it's showing that we may still need to make that paradigm shift where we need to put the focus on our own behavior first and our child's behavior second. So our goal isn't necessarily going to be about motivating our anxious child. If we're waiting for our child to be motivated before we start work on their anxiety, then most of us are going to be waiting a very long time. A lot of our anxious kids, and this is true even of anxious adults, aren't yet in the place where they understand that their anxiety is the issue. A child who's afraid of dogs likely thinks dogs are the issue. A child who feels safest when the mom is around likely thinks that the problem is that mom isn't always able or willing to be around. And parents who think the issue is their child's motivation may need to face the fact that they have anxiety about dealing with their child's anxiety, which is fine. It's understandable. It's a fact for most of us. And let's just let that be true. When it comes back to child anxiety, I think about my own fears as a kid about thunderstorms. I was terrified of them. And the problem to my mind was that they existed, not that I was afraid of them. So the solution my family used was they would put me in the living room with headphones on, and I would listen to The Wizard of Oz on an 8-track tape. That way I couldn't hear the thunder, and when I couldn't hear the thunder, I wasn't afraid of the thunder. That worked just great until one stormy night, the electricity went out, and I found myself alone in a pitch dark room. And you can imagine this did nothing to help me deal with my thunderstorm anxiety. But the reason we went with that solution is my family and I assumed the problem was thunderstorms, and so therefore the solution was to avoid thunderstorms. But actually, it was my anxiety about thunderstorms. And I was not interested in dealing with my anxiety because that was yucky and painful. And again, I didn't see the connection. The problem was thunderstorms. The problem was really that the world was scary and I wanted it to be safe. That's why we parents need to focus on our motivation and then through that motivation, make good decisions for helping our children learn to cope with the reality that the world is often scary and unpredictable and not always safe. As our children get better at coping with that reality, we might then see more motivation from them. Or if they're focused on getting access to the things that they're avoiding, we might see some motivation there too. So, for example, a child who really wants to go to a slumber party but is afraid to sleep away from home might be willing to work on some separation anxiety to get to that slumber party. But it's okay to start before we've got their buy-in. It's okay to start with figuring out our own motivation to start shifting the family dynamics so that we are not perpetuating anxiety. Let's talk about that a little bit. The best way to understand how to motivate ourselves is to understand why we aren't motivated. What's stopping us from climbing out of those parenting pitfalls we find ourselves in when parenting anxious kids? For those of you who are unaware, I'm going to stop for a minute to say parenting pitfalls are the terms I use to describe the things that we as parents do that keep us and our kids stuck in patterns of anxiety. Most of us get stuck in those. That's what the research shows. An example would be my parents using that 8-track tape. It seems like a solution, right? But it can turn into a trap, especially, let's say, if they started staying home on days where storms were predicted because they needed to stay close to the stereo. I know families who can't leave the house on days where the wind is blowing in a certain way because their kids are afraid of storms. And in my family, what did happen is I started begging my mother for the headphones as soon as the clouds began rolling in, whether or not it was actually storming. And so that was keeping me stuck. That was keeping my family stuck. If you aren't sure about parenting pitfalls, you can take my quiz, which you can find at childanxietysupport.com/quiz, and see if and how your family might be stuck. Anyway, common reasons that we as parents aren't motivated to deal with anxiety are lack of time, and boy, do I hear that, and lack of bandwidth, because we are already overwhelmed. And these things, time and capacity, are predictably made worse by parenting an anxious child. Parenting an anxious child is exhausting and it's time consuming. So the traps at first seem like a way to deal with the anxiety less, although they tend to eat up our functioning. So we are doing something to avoid dealing with the anxiety, so the anxiety does not improve, and so we get more stuck, or they begin taking more time because the way we were dealing with it isn't enough and the child wants more and more and more. Another common reason that we might not be motivated is we have real concerns that our child isn't capable of handling the demands of facing their fears. I want to stop and talk about this one because it mirrors the reason our kids are stuck too. They also don't believe they're capable of handling those demands. Let's take two kids who are learning to roller skate. One child isn't anxious. They know they might fall, but they figure they can handle it. The other child is anxious, and they also know they might fall, and they do not feel capable of handling that. It's not necessarily that one is predicting worse outcomes. Both children, let's say, have a friend who broke their wrist roller skating, which is super common. So both of them are aware this is indeed a real risk. But the non-anxious child may feel more confident about their ability to skate, but more importantly, they also feel more confident in their ability to handle something like a wrist fracture. They're not stuck in thinking about it. They are able to say, yeah, it might happen, but the rewards of skating are worth the risk. An anxious child tends to be less optimistic overall, so they might be more fixated on the idea of falling, of breaking their wrist, of the embarrassment of it, of the pain of it, whatever it is. But they also might have a self-concept, a sense of who they are that's more negative. So that's a child who's going to say, I know I'm going to fall. I can't do it. It's too hard. And we go to reassure them, you're going to do great. You'll be fine. Look, your little sister is doing it, so I know you can do it too. But reassurance is the most common pitfall, and it doesn't work because the problem, again, is not that they're afraid of falling per se. It's that they're afraid of their ability to handle it, to handle their fear of falling, to handle the actual falling, to handle any of it. So when we reassure them, it doesn't motivate the anxious child. We're making the mistake that the roller skating is the issue, but it's their anxiety that's the issue. Because the truth is, yeah, they might fall. Anyone on roller skates might fall. Falling is a risk of roller skating. And they might not. And if they do, it might not be so bad. And if they break their wrist, well, it's lousy, but they'll survive it. They have to be willing to live in this muddiness of uncertainty. Now, even as I say these things, I know that as a parent, it can feel somehow irresponsible, like we're saying, broken wrist, no big deal, or that they should just blow off their fears and ignore them. Let me be clear. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the big picture work of anti-anxiety learning is to figure out how to exist in a reality that is unpredictable and sometimes scary and occasionally even dangerous. This is big work, I know, not just for them, but for us. Now, thunderstorms are usually fine, right? But sometimes people do get hit by lightning. Sometimes homes do get destroyed in tornadoes. And sometimes even our all-powerful parents can't keep us safe. And this is a hard reality for us as parents and for our kids. So where's the motivation? It's in believing that our children can indeed handle it, all of the uncertainty, and can have good lives in spite of the world being scary. We have to hold that belief first so that we can offer it to them. You know how we talk about co-regulation on this podcast, on social media, in parenting books and classes? That's the idea that we can bring our calm to our children, that we can share our brains with them. This self-concept piece is like that. We need to figure out how to believe in them even when we're afraid for them, even when we're worried about their anxiety, and even when they don't believe in themselves. We need to find ways to believe in their strength, even when they feel weak. And this is not a suck it up, buttercup, stiff upper lip kind of belief. It's more like, I believe you have the ability to grow through this. I believe that even though you feel scared, that you have inner strength, and that bravery means being afraid but doing it anyway. So it's believing our children's fears are fears, not trying to talk them out of it, but saying, even though you're afraid, I believe that you can enjoy the rewards of roller skating in spite of all that. We can motivate ourselves and our kids by taking things small. And this is a memory I have. My first step towards learning to deal with thunderstorms, a journey that I had throughout my early childhood. And it's a memory my father has too, so I know it was meaningful to him as well. And what it was is he would sit out on the brick front porch of our house, and he would sit me on his lap, and we would watch the storm roll in. And I borrowed his bravery. Now, because he traveled for work, he couldn't do that for me every time. And my mom had 3 kids under 5, so she sure couldn't do that either. But that's okay, because that was my first step into gaining enough confidence to begin that long journey of dealing with my fear of thunderstorms and of my sense of self as someone who could be brave. One thing that can be very helpful is to celebrate your child's wins, big or small. Now, you can do this a couple of ways. You can do it really formally, like announcing beforehand, next time we walk by that barking dog, I will hold your hand, but I will not carry you. But after we do it, we'll celebrate with a sticker, an ice cream cone, or just big hugs. Or you can just spontaneously reward your child when you see them doing the scary thing. My thinking is that once you have a child holding your hand instead of being carried around a scary dog, you might have buy-in for bigger steps or a more explicit written down kind of plan with the whole exposure hierarchy and stair-step rewards, but it doesn't always have to be that formal. I think it helps to be that formal at the beginning for you. And remember, we're focusing on your behavior, and then through your behavior, we're improving your child's ability to cope with their anxiety. If you're interested in figuring out a plan with those kinds of clear steps, what to do when, I encourage you to check out the Child Anxiety Support program at childanxietysupport.com, since this is exactly the kind of work we do inside the membership. Thanks for tuning in this week, and if you have a question you'd like me to address on the show, you can reach out to me by going to childanxietysupport.com and submitting a question there. You can also check out the program while you're there, and if you'd like to learn more about whether or not it would be a good fit for your family, feel free to reach out for a quick consult call. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next week.